She ruled the charts and earned a crown few could touch. But behind the spotlight, Ruth Brown's story took a far quieter, more painful turn. Inside her Las Vegas home, far from the roar of the 1950s R&B scene she once dominated, lived a woman carrying both triumph and regret. How did Miss Rhythm, the voice behind songs that defined an era, end up wrestling with loss, industry betrayal, and a fading spotlight? And what truths did her final years reveal about the cost of fame in a business that rarely protects its queens? This is the story you were never meant to see. Until now. Born in Portsmouth, Virginia, Ruth Brown was the eldest of 7 children in a working-class household. Her father worked as a dockhand and led the choir at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, hoping his daughter would follow a disciplined, church-centered path. But Ruth was restless. While her father imagined hymns and Sunday mornings, she was drawn instead to the energy of USO shows and smoky nightclubs, quietly rebelling as she absorbed the voices of idols like Sarah Vaughan, Billie Holiday, and Dinah Washington. She attended IC Norcom High School, but music, not school or church, was already pulling her elsewhere. At just 17 in 1945, Ruth made a decision that would change her life. She ran away from home with trumpeter Jimmy Brown, whom she soon married, and began singing in bars and clubs wherever they could find work. It was a risky leap, but her voice turned heads quickly. She spent a short but formative period singing with Lucky Millender's orchestra, gaining professional experience that sharpened both her confidence and her sound. Around the same time, Blanche Calloway, sister of Cab Calloway and a bandleader in her own right, arranged a performance for Ruth at Washington, D.C.'s Crystal Caverns nightclub and soon became her manager. That engagement proved pivotal. While performing with Duke Ellington, Ruth caught the attention of radio personality Willis Conover, who immediately recognized her potential and recommended her to Atlantic Records founders Ahmet Ertegun and Herb Abramson. Fate, however, intervened cruelly. On her way to audition, Ruth was seriously injured in a car accident that left her hospitalized for 9 months. Yet even confined to a hospital bed, her momentum didn't stop. Ertegun and Abramson signed her anyway, an extraordinary vote of confidence that spoke volumes about her promise. When the Atlantic executives finally heard her sing in person in 1948, her repertoire leaned heavily toward popular ballads. Ertegun saw something more and persuaded her to pivot toward rhythm and blues. It was a defining moment. In 1949, her first audition recording, So Long, became a hit. But it was 1950's Teardrops from My Eyes, written by Rudy Toombs, that changed everything. Recorded in New York and released that October, the song spent 11 weeks at #1 on Billboard's R&B chart. Almost overnight, Ruth Brown earned the nickname Miss Rhythm, and within months, she was widely recognized as the reigning queen of R&B. Riding the momentum of her first breakthrough, Ruth Brown moved at a relentless pace through the early 1950s, releasing hit after hit with an almost unmatched consistency. She followed Teardrops from My Eyes with I'll Wait For You and I Know in 1951, proving her success was no fluke. By 1953, songs like 5, 10, 15 Hours and the sharp, swaggering Mama, He Treats Your Daughter Mean cemented her image as a bold, emotionally direct performer who could command both heartbreak and humor with ease. Over the next few years, tracks such as Oh What a Dream, Mambo Baby, and later Don't Deceive Me continued to dominate jukeboxes, some credited to Ruth Brown and the Rhythm Makers. As her sound expanded and evolved, the numbers told a staggering story. Between 1949 and 1955, her records spent a total of 149 weeks on the R&B charts, an achievement few artists of any era could rival. In all, she scored 21 top 10 R&B hits, 5 of them reaching #1. By 1954, her influence was undeniable, and she was ranked #1 in Billboard's disc jockey poll for favorite R&B artist, a reflection of just how omnipresent her voice had become on American radio. Touring was grueling, especially in the racially segregated South, but Brown thrived on the road. She played countless dances and theaters across southern states, where her popularity reached almost mythic proportions. She later recalled that a writer once summed it up perfectly. In the South, Ruth Brown is better known than Coca-Cola. Night after night, she sang to packed rooms divided by race but united by her voice, an uncomfortable reality that highlighted both her stardom and the era's injustice. Her stature was further confirmed in June 1954, when she took the stage at the legendary 10th Cavalcade of Jazz concert at Wrigley Field in Los Angeles. Sharing the bill with giants like Count Basie, Louis Jordan, Perez Prado, and other major acts, Brown held her own effortlessly, reinforcing her position at the very center of rhythm and blues culture. By the late 1950s, Ruth Brown began crossing over into the pop charts. In 1957, she recorded Lucky Lips, written by Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, which climbed to #6 on the R&B chart and broke into the pop top 40. The following year, This Little Girl's Gone Rockin', penned by Bobby Darin and Man Curtis, followed a similar path. As the 1950s drew to a close, Ruth Brown was still recording, but the musical landscape around her was changing. She scored later R&B successes with I Don't Know in 1959 and Don't Deceive Me in 1960, records that resonated strongly with her core audience, but failed to make the same impact on the pop charts. The shift signaled a gradual retreat from the spotlight rather than a dramatic fall. By the mid-1960s, Brown made only occasional appearances, including a guest spot on TV Gospel Time in 1965. Before stepping almost completely out of public view. For much of the 1960s, Brown lived quietly as a housewife and mother, far removed from the non-stop touring, recording schedules, and segregated dance halls that had defined her earlier life. To many fans, it seemed as if Miss Rhythm had vanished. In reality, she was simply resting, though not by choice so much as circumstance, waiting for the industry to rediscover what it had once taken for granted. That rediscovery came in 1975, sparked by comedian Red Fox, who urged her to return to performing. Brown followed his advice, easing back into entertainment through comedy and acting rather than music alone. The move unexpectedly opened a new chapter in her career. She began landing television roles, including a recurring part as the outspoken neighbor Leona Wilson in the second season of the sitcom Hello, Larry, proving her timing and presence extended far beyond the recording studio. Her most iconic acting role arrived when she was cast as Motormouth Maybelle Stubbs in John Waters' cult classic Hairspray. As the warm, fearless record store owner and mother to Seaweed and Little Inez, Brown stole scenes with the same authority she once brought to the R&B charts. The role introduced her to a new generation and cemented her status as a cultural bridge between classic rhythm and blues and modern pop sensibilities. Broadway soon followed. Brown appeared in stage productions of Amen Corner and Black and Blue, the latter becoming a career-defining triumph. In 1989, she won the Tony Award for Best Actress in a Musical, a historic moment that reframed her legacy, not as a forgotten hitmaker, but as a fully realized performer whose talent had only deepened with time. New York Times critic Frank Rich captured it perfectly, writing that Brown applies sarcastic varnish and two-a-day burlesque timing to her material, turning experience into power. By the late 1980s, Ruth Brown had become something even more formidable than a hitmaker. She was a fighter. In 1987, after years of watching pioneering R&B artists struggle in poverty while their recordings generated millions, Brown openly challenged the music industry over unpaid royalties and unfair contracts. Her public battle helped expose systemic exploitation, and in 1988, it directly led to the founding of the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, an organization dedicated to securing financial relief, healthcare assistance, and justice for veteran musicians. In recognition of her courage and leadership, Brown became one of the first recipients of the foundation's Pioneer Award in 1989. That same year marked a creative resurgence. Brown released the album Blues and Broadway, a sophisticated blend of jazz, blues, and theater standards that showcased the depth and maturity of her voice. The record earned her a Grammy Award for Best Jazz Vocal Performance, Female, confirming that her talent had not only endured, but evolved. Honors continued to follow. She was inducted into the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame in 1992, and a year later, she received one of music's highest distinctions with her induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. Brown remained artistically active and deeply respected among her peers. She recorded and performed with fellow rhythm and blues legend Charles Brown, and in the late 1990s, toured with Bonnie Raitt, reaching new audiences who embraced her as both an elder stateswoman and a living link to R&B's roots. Her 1995 autobiography, Miss Rhythm, offered an unflinching account of her life and career and won the Gleason Award for music journalism. That same year, she appeared on Raitt's road-tested live DVD, delivering a memorable performance of Never Make Your Move Too Soon. Her recording career continued well into her later years. In 1997, Brown released R+B = Ruth Brown, earning another Grammy nomination in the traditional blues category. Her cultural influence extended beyond music as well. She was portrayed by singer Tressa Thomas in the 2000 television miniseries Little Richard, further cementing her role as a foundational figure in American music history. Brown also became a beloved radio voice. Beginning in 1989, she hosted Blues Stage, a weekly program carried by more than 200 NPR affiliates. For 6 years, she introduced listeners to classic and contemporary blues artists, sharing stories, context, and personal insight that only someone who had lived the music could provide. Remarkably, Brown was still touring at age 78, refusing to slow down even as her health began to falter. Near the end of her life, she completed pre-production work for John Sayles' film Honey Dripper, though she did not live to finish the project. Still, her voice endured. Her recording of Things About Comin' My Way was released posthumously on the film's soundtrack. Brown gave her final interview in August 2006, leaving behind a legacy not just of groundbreaking songs, but of resilience, advocacy, and a lifelong refusal to be erased. Looking back on her journey, Ruth Brown often reflected on the moment when black music began to crystallize into what the world would soon call rhythm and blues. For her, the shift became unmistakable around 1951 or 1952. That was when a powerful radio signal began cutting through the silence. "I guess in 51 or 52, she recalled, you started hearing it from a radio show called Randy's Record Shop in Gallatin, Tennessee. At the time, mainstream top 100 stations in the East and North refused to play what they still labeled race music. But WLAC's signal was different and unstoppable. The station was strong," Brown said. "You could pick it up in California and in Virginia. You could pick it up practically everywhere." What most listeners didn't realize was that the man behind the show was white. "What people didn't know was that Randy was a white man," she noted, crediting the program's host, Gene Nobles, with helping spark the turning point when rhythm and blues began crossing racial and geographic boundaries. As the format gained traction, Brown noticed other stations slowly following suit. But long before national acceptance, black communities had already built their own airwaves. "At that time, in every major city, there was a black-oriented radio station," she explained. "That was necessary. We didn't get the coverage." For Brown, those stations were lifelines. She vividly remembered the DJ who shaped her musical ear as a child. "I grew up listening to Jack Holmes," she said. "He was the DJ who turned my ear." His show, The Mailbag, introduced her to artists like Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Lucky Millinder, Buddy Johnson, the Charioteers, and the Ink Spots. I could hardly wait for my daddy to get out of the house in the morning, Brown laughed, so I could flip over to this station. Her own path into the music business was anything but smooth. After being fired from Lucky Millender's big band, Brown found herself stranded in Washington, D.C. with no money for a ticket home. Worse still, she couldn't call her family for help. Because I was in a business that my daddy didn't want me in, I couldn't call home, she said. Salvation came in the form of Blanche Calloway, Cab Calloway's sister, who was running the Crystal Caverns nightclub. Calloway gave Brown a job singing there, just long enough, Brown hoped, to earn her way back to Virginia. Then came the night that changed everything. Duke Ellington was appearing at the Howard Theater and stopped by the club with Willis Conover of Voice of America and Sonny Till of the Orioles. Brown was performing what she later dismissed as junk, pop standards by Vaughn Monroe, the Andrews Sisters, and Bing Crosby. But when she realized Sonny Till was in the room, everything shifted. They had this record called It's Too Soon to Know, she remembered. When I realized that that was Sonny Till, oh! She asked the bandleader to let her sing it and dedicated the song directly to him. She could see the impact instantly. I saw Duke Ellington's expression, Brown said, and without his saying a word, I knew that he was pleased. Willis Conover, however, appeared restless, even rude. When he suddenly stood up and walked away to a payphone, Brown felt crushed. I thought, that's how bad I am. In reality, Conover was doing the exact opposite. He was calling Ahmet Ertegun. Soon after, Atlantic Records executives Herb Abramson and Blackie Sales arrived to hear her sing. By then, Blanche Calloway had broadened Brown's repertoire, teaching her Ethel Waters material and encouraging her to perform songs like Billie Holiday's haunting Gloomy Sunday. Brown realized later that what caught their attention wasn't polish, but range. I think they saw my versatility, she reflected. I wasn't doing any real swinging, grooving things. I had a taste for torch ballads. I was doing everything except what I would end up doing. House That Ruth Built. People often ask how it was possible that some of the R&B artists who laid the foundations of rock and roll ended up with so little to show for it, while others built fortunes simply laying foundations of houses. Few stories illustrate that imbalance more clearly than Ruth Brown's. Ruth Brown's success quite literally kept a struggling young label, Atlantic Records, from collapsing in its early years. Yet the partnership between Brown and Atlantic co-founder Ahmet Ertegun, which began with warmth and loyalty, eventually unraveled into legal battles and deep resentment. Their connection started by chance and through tragedy. Brown was involved in a serious car accident in Chester, Pennsylvania, that shattered both of her legs and left her hospitalized for nearly a year. A DJ had already alerted Atlantic to her talent, and when Ertegun heard her sing, the label was so convinced of her potential that they paid her medical bills. Ertegun even signed her to a contract while she was still confined to her hospital bed. At the same time, Brown's personal life was collapsing. Her husband, Jimmy Brown, quickly annulled their marriage after assuming she would never walk again. Complicating matters further, Ruth later discovered that Jimmy had already been married when they wed. Atlantic, by contrast, embraced her. Brown remembered that period with real affection, saying she felt like part of a family. When she was discharged from the hospital, Ertegun and his partners routinely included her in meals and outings. They looked after her, and soon her success would look after them. In the early 1950s, Atlantic's finances were precarious. Jerry Wexler later recalled that the label needed to sell tens of thousands of records each month just to survive, with executives anxiously crunching numbers week by week. That anxiety faded once Ruth Brown began delivering hit after hit. Songs like Mama, He Treats Your Daughter Mean, and This Little Girl's Gone Rockin' turned her into Atlantic's most reliable source of income. In many ways, the label became known as the House That Ruth Built. But success came with an ugly underside. Brown watched as white singers recorded sanitized versions of her songs, a common industry practice known as whitewashing. While those covers found mainstream TV exposure, Brown herself was excluded. She later said the practice did nothing but block her career, noting that she never appeared on major shows like The Ed Sullivan Show while others profited from her work. By the end of the 1950s, Brown's hit streak slowed, and Atlantic's loyalty cooled with it. When she left the label in 1960, she was stunned to be told she owed the company $30,000 after recording costs, touring expenses, and band fees were charged directly to her account. She received no royalties. For each song she recorded, she was paid less than $70 per side. Feeling responsible for not understanding the business, Brown took whatever work she could find, cleaning houses, driving school buses, working as a teacher's aide and drug counselor to support her two sons. Her personal life offered little refuge. All three of her marriages ended in divorce. She later joked bitterly that while she could always pick a great song, she never could pick a good man. When she finally turned to Ertegun for financial help, he sent her a $1,000 check, an insult she described as crumbs from a wealthy man's table. Her turning point came unexpectedly in 1975, when she went to see her old friend Red Fox perform. Fox invited her to appear on Sanford and Son. Reluctant and nearly broke, she hesitated to travel, but Fox insisted and sent her a plane ticket. That brief appearance reignited her career, opening doors to acting on television, film, and Broadway. It eventually led to her Tony Award-winning performance in Black and Blue, her scene-stealing role in Hairspray, and steady television work. For the first time in years, Brown was earning enough to hire a lawyer. When she finally confronted Atlantic, the outcome was bittersweet. She personally received only a modest settlement, but her fight helped establish the Rhythm and Blues Foundation, funded with $1.5 million to support artists who had been exploited by the industry. Ruth Brown continued working across music, theater, radio, and television well into her later years, including hosting an NPR program that celebrated R&B history. She remained sharp, witty, and generous until the end. In one of her last memories, she recalled a call from Ray Charles, who asked who should play her in a film. Without missing a beat, she told him, "Halle Berry, you crazy fool." Ray shot back, "I ain't that blind." It was a fitting exchange, funny, sharp, and fearless, just like Ruth Brown herself. The quiet final chapter, Ruth Brown's home, wealth, and life after the spotlight. By the time Ruth Brown settled into her later years, she had already earned her place in music history many times over. Known as Miss Rhythm, she had dominated R&B charts, rescued Atlantic Records from collapse, and later fought back against the industry that underpaid her. Yet the final chapter of her life unfolded far from New York studios or Southern tour circuits, inside a quiet home in the Las Vegas area, where legacy mattered less than peace. Ruth Brown's Las Vegas area house reflected a woman who had lived through both stardom and struggle. It was not a flashy entertainer's mansion, nor a shrine to her past success. Instead, it was comfortable, private, and practical, chosen for stability rather than status. The home was described by those close to her as warm and orderly. Brown preferred calm surroundings, with space to read, listen to music, and rest between performances. Photos of family, handwritten notes, and carefully kept mementos carried more meaning than awards. Her Grammy and Tony represented milestones, but they were not what defined her daily life. Las Vegas suited her in unexpected ways. It offered privacy, distance from the industry politics of New York and Los Angeles, and access to top-tier medical care as she aged. More importantly, it allowed her control, something she had lacked during her early career, when contracts were signed for her and royalties never came. Despite being one of the most influential R&B artists of the 1950s, Ruth Brown's net worth at the time of her death was modest compared to the revenue her music generated. Estimates generally place it in the low millions, a figure that says more about industry exploitation than personal failure. At the height of her chart dominance, Brown was paid flat session fees. For many of her biggest hits, she earned roughly $69 to $70 per song side with no royalties. Those songs, Teardrops from My Eyes, 5, 10, 15 hours, Mama, He Treats Your Daughter Mean, sold hundreds of thousands of copies and kept Atlantic Records afloat. Meanwhile, Brown later struggled to support her children and took regular jobs outside music. Financial stability did not arrive until decades later. Her Broadway success, especially Black and Blue, her Grammy win, touring in the 1990s, and legal advocacy through the Rhythm and Blues Foundation finally gave her security. Even then, she lived carefully. Brown never forgot what it felt like to lose everything. Ruth Brown's Las Vegas life was defined by intention. She toured selectively, often well into her 70s, but only when the work respected her artistry. She hosted radio shows, mentored younger musicians, and continued speaking publicly about artists' rights. She lived simply. Friends described her as disciplined, sharp-minded, and quietly humorous. She enjoyed conversation, history, and music more than luxury. There were no extravagant parties, no Hollywood spectacle, just a woman who had earned the right to live on her own terms. Even in her late 70s, Brown was still working. She remained engaged, curious, and proud, not bitter. Her home was less a retirement space than a command center for a woman who never fully stopped creating. In the fall of 2006, Brown's health began to fail. She suffered a heart attack and stroke following surgery the previous month. Complications set in quickly. On November 17, 2006, Ruth Brown died in a Las Vegas area hospital. She was 78 years old. A memorial concert celebrating her life and music was held on January 22, 2007, at the historic Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York. The location was symbolic. Harlem had been central to Black music, activism, and cultural survival, values Ruth Brown embodied both on stage and off.